There we go. So I'd like to welcome everyone tonight to our TRMN Social Hour. Tonight we bring to you an Ask Me Anything with one of our favorite authors, Dr. Charles Gannon, professor of English, author, subject matter specialist for a bunch of places, gaming author. He does all, I mean, I looked at his main site and I just couldn't write it all down. So welcome, Chuck.
Well, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Woo-hoo.
I haven't seen a lot of these faces since, I think, HonorCon 2016.
Probably.
All right, about right. If you have any questions for Dr. Gannon, please message myself or Cheryl, and we will put you in the queue. When it is your turn, we will call you by your name, and you will be able to unmute your microphone and ask your question. Until then, we ask that all attendees keep their microphones on mute as a courtesy to other attendees and our guests.
So let's start with some general questions while the social crew here is getting their own questions formulated. Dr. Gannon, can you start out by telling us a little bit about yourself? It's been a crazy year with COVID and everything going on this year. How have you been doing?
Well, the first thing I'll tell you about myself is that since you're not a doctor or a hostile lawyer, you just call me Chuck.
Okay.
So I've been doing fine. A little bit about me. I live in Annapolis with my wife and 3 of our 4 living children. And this is what I've always wanted to do. I knew that since the time I was 12. David and I have links that go back before we knew each other. We were one of those sort of 1 degree of separation moments. You were talking about Jane Linskold before, when she was getting her, I guess, undergrad and then master's and doctorate at Fordham. I was working in Manhattan at that time at TV, and a friend of mine said, "Oh, there are people who role play down here at Fordham. You should come." So I did. And one of our other game individuals is in this crazy and exceptionally crowded Hollywood squares that we have here. If you were to look down to Tom McCarroll, who's waving down right next to, in my view, David Weber, he was actually the person who facilitated that. So that's how I first, our circuit started meeting before we did. And before I even knew much about David, frankly, at all, because that was my focus was very much on writing in games at that point, which I believe was David's focus at that point too.
I did some games, but not to the extent that you did. For me, it was definitely just sort of a sideline. I'm thinking that were you working with Steve White before you and I actually met? I'm thinking you may have been, because I know Jim paired you with him early.
No, it wasn't Jim. Jim was out of the picture.
Yeah, oh, that's Jim, right. That's right.
Jim
that's right.
Jim
yeah.
I met Steve White, I want to say sometime in around 2008, 2000. One of the first cons I did when I came down to Maryland. And we hit it off right away. And he was, he had woes. He was singing to all who would listen about what was going on in that particular series.
Yes.
And we always joked. I always joked, well, if you ever got to get somebody to put an oar in the water for you. And I know we're telling tales that probably are only vaguely meaningful to anybody here, but we're talking about Starfire. And I was about to go overseas for 3 weeks, and I was closing down the top of my laptop, and an email popped up, and it was, "Were you serious, Chuck?" from Steve White. After doing the little victory dance around my kitchen, I found a way to say that in a very calm, sort of professional manner, when my actual internal reaction was, "Do bears, do it in the woods?"
Keyboards are our saviors sometimes.
Yeah, right. Yes, they are. They really are. So that's. So I don't think we'd met yet, though. At that point.
I don't think so either.
I don't recall the first time exactly. I don't recall.
Was it
We'd met at Archon, because you were out there and you met my friend Mark Cunningham. We all went out to dinner together.
Were you at LibertyCon?
Could have been.
I don't know. It just seems like, it's one of those relationships where remembering the very first time you met is difficult, because in a lot of ways the relationship works so well that it's one of those comfort situations.
Yeah.
And then too, of course, there's the fact that I knew your name from Jane.
Mhm.
So even though we hadn't met, you were a little bit of a known quantity to me.
A negative integer, of course, but a quantity nonetheless.
No. There were no signs in front of the number.
Oh my goodness. That used to be a safe thing to say, not anymore. I mean,
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So
All
how is
right.
this year's events, COVID and all the stuff that's going on affected your writing?
This is, I avoided this because this is, frankly, when you have 4 kids and 3 are still at home, and it's you would think, oh my gosh, it's impossible. But in actuality, my kids are, well, one is home from college, 2 are middle school, but very self-directed. So in many ways, this has been, I don't have to go anywhere for cons. I love cons. I love being with folks, but I also like my writing, and you can't do those 2 things at the same time. At least I can't. I mean, literally at the same time. It's like, well, I'll take your question in a second, but I have to kill this character off right now. So the integration is not quite that close. But it saves me a lot of time, a lot of travel. The kids actually, because they have less to do, because they're on computers. We're very fortunate. We have a very good sort of distance learning, e-learning sort of setup. The first semester wasn't so great, but the second semester has been they've been really on top of it. So I've actually had more time than ever, and it's been an extremely productive year for me. I finished 2, 3 books. I'll have written 2, at least in their entirety, kind of closer to 3, and in 3 different universes. So, probably the good news is that I've been very productive. The bad news is I'm probably verging into multiple personality syndrome at this point.
It's been a crazy year for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what was your first inspiration that just made you decide to pick up pen? I mean, when was it you realized that writing was, I mean, you said when you wanted to do this since you were 12, but what made you realize that this was kind of your vocation? What was the impetus behind that?
Well, you're going to hear the pattern very quickly. When I was 3 years old, I grew up about 30 miles north of New York City, and we would go into the Natural Museum of History. At that point, dinosaur exhibits were not that well distributed around the country for all sorts of reasons. And I would go and commune with the Triceratops, and be his spirit human in his perpetually frozen, not to say petrified, face off with the Tyrannosaurus Rex they had also there. And I thought I would love to be a paleontologist, I thought, as soon as I could pronounce that, and write about it. And then I wanted to be a zoologist and write about it. And then I thought it would be cool to be an astronomer and write about it. And then, wow, it would be cool to be an astronaut. Ooh, that's dangerous. Maybe I'll just write about it. And that was about the point I realized I wanted to immerse myself in all the cool things, which the older I grew, the more I realized were about 98% pretty dull routines and very, very repetitious, in order to get those 2%, you hope, if you're fortunate, of the sort of the big glory or payoff. And by glory, I don't mean to other people. I mean just the sort of sense of, wow, I lived that moment. Whereas this way, I get to reverse it when you get right down to it. So I knew from about age 11 or 12, this is what I wanted to do, and started writing the most shameful derivative things you've ever seen in your life, or you won't see in your life because I'll never show them. So that's my history.
So most people immediately think of the critically acclaimed Tales of the Terran Republic, or better known as the Kane Reorder series. I hope I said that correctly.
You did, and actually there's a guy here who renamed it further. It was David and Casey Ezel who started calling it, although they said they already heard people referring to it as the Kane verse. And my response to that has always been, I'd have never been nervy enough to brand it, but hey, if it's good enough for Honor Harrington, it's good enough for me. So,
hey man, it's fantastic. So what is your elevator pitch on that series if some of us were trying to slang it for you?
It's got it all. Let's assume a very short elevator ride. it's hard SF, and you can find, I would say you'll hear notes of espionage, intrigue, obviously action, adventure, combat, military, a lot of first contact. But at the base of it all, when you start with the first book and move on, there is a mystery that we're trying to solve about what our place is in the universe, but particularly this particular arm of the galaxy, because something was clearly going on here before now. So the elevator has now probably gone up and come down. But that's the pitch in terms of what it's where it's centered. The character pitch, if that's what you're looking for, is my fans always do a better job of this than I do. I was at a con and somebody said, "Yeah, but what's it about?" And the guy said, "Dude, it's like Kane Reorder is sort of like he's got the mind of Batman, but the heart of Captain America in a regular guy's body." And I said, "Okay, I'm keeping that. You know, I'm using that," which is really kind of what it is. His only superpower, because I think that even in completely realistic fiction, all characters have that something special that makes the story, that makes it feel like the story belongs on them, if you know what I mean. It's that sort of lodestone of significance that pulls us toward them and say, yeah, this person should have a book about them. In his case, that the superpower, I guess you could say, is that he is a polymath, not in the way that it would, for instance, you think about Da Vinci, but in the sense that this is a person who thinks paradigmatically, and his claim to fame is, yeah, he makes tons of mistakes, but he generally makes them once. So that's who he is, and he also has the critical failing. If you've got the superpower, you got to have the Achilles heel. His problem is he really, really, really doesn't want to ever lie. And since he winds up working with the government a lot, well, I'll let you fill in the blank.
I'd like to add that one of the things that I particularly like about this series is the diversity of the aliens involved. The fact that you clearly have the feel that you are looking at different species, not just we changed the makeup, but they have different mindsets, they have different approaches, they have different logical biases. And Chuck has done a remarkable job of thinking through the logical implications of what he set up for their societal patterns and where they live and how that affects their view of the universe. That's not as easy to do as it might appear to people who haven't done it.
Well, I thank you, David. That's praise from Caesar, as they say. But
yeah,
for me,
praise from Caesar, and you're on your way to the arena. You don't want to go there. You know?
Give me a cystai and a quick slug of brandy, and I'm there for it. Okay. And it won't be the head that's coming out first when I leave. But at any rate, to give you an example of that shows up in a lot of big ways, but for me, the part of the drill down level I do on an alien species is there's a species called the Arakur. The Arakur are actually, they're mammalian, but they look sort of insect-like because they're subterranean. And this was part of their survival. This was their, if you will, their evolutionary moment. They're trappers, they're not hunters. And they found it much easier to dig pits, have things fall in them, die, eat them, and dig more pits. But it was safer because they had too many weaknesses out in the light, out where they could be approached from the rear, because they don't have, their head is imagine like a roach. A roach can't turn its head, you know. Situational awareness, not its best talent. So what does that mean? It means they're in subterranean areas. That means that visible light spectrum, as we understand it, is almost useless to them. How do they make up for that? Well, they have IR, they have sort of natural thermal vision, but also they have echolocation, even far more sophisticated even than a bat or a dolphin. Well, I started thinking about this and I said, if they have attraction, what is it? I mean, with humans, it's what we call primary or secondary sex characteristics, right? Well, what would it be for them? And then I realized it would be their singing voice. Because sound would be the way they shape and interact with each other and understand their environment. And man, if you could croon like Bing, you know, you were probably going to do all right
Right.
in the subterranean reaches of the Arakur planets.
Cool.
That is actually the species that I was thinking about front and center when I was talking just a minute ago. And the other thing that happens is Chuck is very good at generating the blind spots, not just peripheral vision, but the conceptual blind spots of the various species involved, and does it in a way that fits it logically into the story. And they can be played upon by other species. They can also just be weaknesses that the acting characters in the book don't realize are there. And that can be difficult to do too. So all in all, I think Chuck has many strengths as a writer. I think his world building, he goes about it in, I think, sometimes a different way from the way that I do, because I begin with the physical structure and then people it kind of thing. I think Chuck begins with the people and then runs the physical structure in under it. Is it the other way around?
No.
Okay.
No.
All right.
I'm very much like you. And part of the reason it starts that way is because one of the things that there's so much science fiction I love, so little that I don't, and you'll never know because I'll never talk about it. Because mama brought me up right that way. But one of the things that I do feel sometimes in science fiction, in most fiction, is how convenient things are. Isn't it convenient that we have just this kind of planet around that kind of sun at just that point in or at the edge of the Goldilocks zone or whatever, and then this and that and the other thing. One of the things that I do, and this probably comes from a mixture of my gaming and simulation background, is that actually I'll kind of when I am developing a system, I'll let it throw some random numbers at me, and then I have to deal with it. And what that does is it gives me a problem, but those problems then trickle down to all the inhabitants of that system, and then their evolution is shaped by that. And every single one of the species in my books, if you say, well, why are they that way? I'll say, do you want to hear their dawn of intelligence story? And most people, of course, at that moment will do the same thing and run screaming to another state. But for those who are not so swift of either foot or mind, what I can do is I can share the equivalent in my world building of that moment. And I'm sure anybody here who has not seen 2001, A Space Odyssey, you really need to, if for no other reason than before we get to space, because the first part, the ascent of man, sorry, that was 69, 68, I think. So somebody will definitely Google that before the echo has pardon me? What's that?
Lori Bonilla, she's our Googler.
Okay. But I think she's tied up with a felinoid species right now, from what I can see. Yeah. But at any rate, there's that wonderful moment when the bone, the notion of tool use becomes protection, becomes feeding, and ultimately becomes first kinslaying. And the way that is shaped is that intelligence is on the species that is going to become intelligent, us, questionable, is on the edge of extinction. And what happens is this moment it justifies the most expensive organ in our body. I do not mean our ego, although it's where it lives, which is the brain. The brain, when you think about it, is an incredibly expensive organ that really doesn't push anything back immediately. It's a processor for the most part, with some very simple computing when we are in the more basic species. But as we get older, my God, it increases the gestation period, it increases the learning to maturity period, it increases all sorts of complexities that make all sorts of trouble in evolution until you get intelligence. And when you get intelligence and anything like these, boy, how those scales tip quickly. And one of the beautiful things about that scene is when, if you remember the movie, he throws the bone up in the air, the first weapon, the first weapon that slayed another one of our own kind. It turns into a satellite. What a lot of folks don't realize is that satellite in the book, first the Sentinel, and then the novelization of it, is he goes from the first weapon, Kubrick, to the last weapon, because that's an orbiting ICBM, single missile silo. And that sort of thing, that left a huge impress on me, in that how we survive, how we get ourselves from the brink of extinction to justify evolutionarily in our own bodies the development of intelligence. I believe that leaves a very powerful mark. It would, I think. And at any rate, that's sort of what I used as my lodestone and my North Star. So going to what this is, yeah, see, David, I'm sorry. He said a simple thing. I start with worlds, and then I essentially write a book here on Zoom.
Trust me, I don't know anybody else that ever happens with.
No, I know, and you, that monk-like silence that you
absolutely.
observe.
You know, I never use two words when one will do the trick.
Right. Sure.
I think that there could be a commonality there in part, in that we were both RPGers.
Yeah.
For so long, and I always got stuck running the universe, and so I had no choice but to learn how to make good universes, because no, you be the games master, but I want to go out there and kill shit. No, you be the games master. Okay.
Oh, we have that in common. That's for damn sure.
That's like, I hope you like a fountain of Balrogs.
So Chuck, I know that the Murphy's Lawless collection came out yesterday. What can you tell us about that?
I can tell you that we're the bottom line is that this thing keeps surprising me. It was under the top 10. It was inside the top 10 on a number of different indices on Amazon yesterday. It was it got into categories I could have never imagined, which has to do with, if he's here, the genius of Chris Kennedy Publications, because he sure found the right places for it. The really quick version of this is that I always knew that there was an untapped potential for what I'll call ripping yarns in the universe, in the Kane verse, the Terran Republic, and coming from that gaming background, it would be remarkable, stunning, surprising, I'm sure, that somebody would look at them and say, wow, those could be very quickly turned into gaming supplements, couldn't they? What a shock, as if it was planned. But so one of the things that I was doing with Murphy's Lawless, this was my first attempt to sort of say there's other stories to be told. The sort of stories I'm telling in the Kane novels, the main arc, are, when I say serious, I don't mean that people sit there with grim faces, although given my prose, maybe they do. But it certainly, I think, is, it's not, you're not going to say, what am I going to read? Baldacci or Gannon? Let me tell you, you're going to be in a different mood for one to the other. That's just going to be the way it is. But I wanted something that was a little more in the style of the ripping yarn, and I just felt that there were so many potentials for that. So I approached Chris Kennedy after having explored this for a while. I also wanted to do something in electronic. I get the feeling that we are hybrid authorship these days is not the worst idea in the world if you have the time to do it. And at that point, I did have the time. I wanted to be very selective about it. So I said to Chris, at this point, I think it had been nominated for the Nebula 3 times, and the Dragon once, and it had I guess some vibe or vibe, noise going behind it. And I said, I had this idea for a series called Murphy's Lawless that would be, and he said, I'm in. I'm like, okay. I didn't get a chance. I didn't get it out of my mouth. But the whole idea was, I wanted to do something that would be a little bit Band of Brothers and a little bit Kelly's Heroes. And that's really what we put together. And if you know the series, there are people, there are soldiers, but not just soldiers, from the 20th century, from about 1935 to about 1995, who one of the inimical, you might almost call them alien forces, have they were removing for reasons not that are mistaken several times before somebody actually discovers what's really going on. And they are picked up along the way in the fourth book. And I just thought it would be a hoot to cut those, a selection of those folks loose on a planet, with the idea being like Kelly's heroes. The ones they have to choose are the ones that for one reason or another, they can't represent a suboptimal group going forward on this rescue mission that they're on. Yeah, go ahead.
I was reading Murphy's Lawless last night.
Were you?
Yes, I was.
The novel of
the anthology, the one that just came out.
Oh, okay. The novel, yeah, the whole novel, right?
Yeah. And I have to say that the anthology, the short stories that just came out, I mean, that's how I think of them. I almost think of them also as part of the microcosmic of the mainstream novel's macrocosmic insight into the universe, because you concentrate on small groups of individuals. Or I especially like the lead story. Okay, never piss off an old guy. Really, he'll come home to haunt you. But they give teeny tiny windows into this great big house, whereas Kane, from the very beginning, he's kind of going in through the front door, shotgun at the ready, kind of thing.
Or at least taped into his hands.
Yeah.
What am I doing here?
Yeah. Well, I'm probably only about 4 or 5 into the collection, because life happened. But I've enjoyed it very much so far.
Are you talking about Lost Signals or Murphy's Lawless?
Murphy's Lawless, I think, was the title that I ordered on.
Because if you're 4 or 5 in, you're most of the way. Oh, you mean chapters? Okay.
Yeah. Okay. I'm like,
okay, yeah. Yes, absolutely so. And the other thing that I wanted to do is I wanted to pull 20th century sensibilities into it. And this gave me an opportunity to bring in everything from, the big band era through grunge. So that was something I just wanted to do for all sorts of reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought it was, I wanted another on-ramp to the entire universe. And it just seemed like this one would be a very immediately accessible on-ramp, because this one starts literally in a helicopter leaving Mogadishu.
Which is a good thing to do.
In
a helicopter leaving Mogadishu.
Not so much.
Generally speaking. As a notion,
yes. So come and play there. Yes, absolutely.
So you've played in several writers' universes and different sandboxes, David Weber, clearly, John Ringo, Eric Flint, just to name only a few. So which in some, I know you can't, it's kind of hard to answer this, but which did you have the most fun in? Like, which universe did you have the most? Did you feel you were able to really show yourself?
You can't ask that with somebody else.
I know. Well, you're here. You kind of ruined my question.
I know.
How about mute?
Besides me.
Besides David, what other universes have you had that you felt like you were really able to show you as a writer and your art?
Really, I would say, gosh. I'm gonna answer it from the other end of the telescope, so to speak, which is one of the things you didn't mention, because it's not fiction, so to speak. Well, we think of it now that way, but is the gaming writing. In the gaming writing, that's such a collaborative enterprise, and you have so many other people who are involved, and you have to be essentially always holding the door, for knowing that somebody's going to come along with a different view, of different style, a different focus. you're really coloring inside the lines in a way that you don't have to. I've been very blessed in my collaborators because I really I get an idea and I just want to run with it, and they've all been great about that. Most of what you see, for instance, whether that was what was in I think it was Worlds of Honor 6, or whether it's a novel with Eric Flint. I think Eric in the most recent one, No Peace Beyond the Line, he's the first one to tell folks. I think he wrote about 400 words, and he maybe suggested the removal of 2,000 or 3,000. And that's been our pattern pretty much the way through. And how can I not love that? And the good thing is I've really not had to. The only one that came to me without, as sort of like me falling into a pot of jam, was in a sense the first one, Starfire, but that was it was dead luck that it was a great place to start up. There's probably no better place to earn your spurs because of all the things you're doing in a space opera that is also stapled to a lot of physics, which actually then Steve White was totally fine with me even going further with. Like, why is it that why is it that things happen to ships the way they do in that series? And it hadn't been important before, but for me, it became interesting, because I came to it, late, and it grew up out of a game, but it had evolved from that game. And after the first one, Steve was sitting, I was sitting at his house in Virginia, and he's saying, what comes next? And I said, he said, I guess it's time to find a bigger elephant. And I said, because the thing is that the ships got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and what used to be the great dreadnoughts of the first books were now sort of like they fit in secondary bays of these ships. The Death Star, Schmeth Star is sort of the scope. And so what I said is, I think we have to change that model. And he was perfectly, for people who haven't read After Extremis, it is Imperative and Oblivion. I started playing around with quantum tunneling and the idea of what if you could take matter and it would disappear from a place and then reappear in another place, and the physics consequences that might have upon big, slow, otherwise indestructible objects. And what we wound up doing was the vector that if you will came out of the game got really sideswiped, which was for me a huge amount of fun. And so this is a long way of saying I don't know how to answer that question, Dan. I'm like I've loved working in all of them. I've learned something in all of them. People half of one of Larry Niven's Man Kazin books are 2 braided novellas by me, and Larry was like, cool, all right, fine, good. So I've always had a great. I was invited into a great sandbox full of the coolest toys that I couldn't afford. And somebody said, play, and I said, yeah. So that's pretty much it.
That's definitely the way to do it.
So conversely, you now have people playing in your sandbox. What's that like? Is that similarities and differences?
One of the differences, I think, well, there are a lot of similarities, huge number of similarities. Once again, I feel extraordinarily, I would say suspiciously blessed, in that, to the level that I keep on looking when a truck is going to hit me, because I don't know how I fell in to such a great group of people to work with. And I don't mean that just on the level of the writers in it, but the artists, and the fact that I was able to go to Tony Weisskopf, because my attitude was, as soon as Kevin said he'd be interested, my next stop was talking to Tony, because the bottom line is this is a Bain imprint, and I wanted to let her know, A, that I was thinking of doing this, B, what my intent was in doing this, and to coordinate in any way. And if she felt the need to put a kibosh on that, then that was something that I would work with her on that if I could. But the bottom line is I know where I live, and Bain was always the place I wanted to publish. I was pretty clear that it was the only place that was probably going to want to publish me with the freedoms that I wanted to have in writing what I wanted to write about. And so I just got lucky up and down the line. The thing that's probably a little bit different is because those of you who've read widely in the series knows that after the fourth novel, an anthology came out called Lost Signals. That came out through Ring of Fire Press. That's Eric Flint's press. And 20 people were in there. And it gave me this huge opportunity. And people were, they felt, are you sure you want to do that? Do you want different voices in your world? I mean, it's your world. It is a very strong voice. I said, look, what I want is a world to be immersive. And I think believability is part of immersivity. And for something to be believable, as much as I try to stand back from that narrative, and I really try to stand back from that narrative in terms of narrative voice, I think that when you bring more voices into it, when you bring more perspectives into it, what you get is the diversity we live. A world filled with different perspectives and different ways and experiences. It is very unlikely that how many experiences can you have? How many roles can you live in your life? But what happened is 20 people came in and did that for my universe. And all of these places, all these jigsaw puzzles off in the corners for which I would have never had the time to go there and do that. The reason I get into this is not only was I lucky with those 20 people, but there were 3 or 4 people that sort of approached me saying, right after the first book won the Compton Crook Award, are you ever going to open it up? Which is kind of weird, you know? It's 145,000 words, first book, and folks are saying, again, it's an interesting world. You're going to open it up. By the time the second book came out, and also was an Nebula nominee, I had more people asking me. And so what I was doing early on was something that I think I was just very, very fortunate in terms of being able to sit there and say, I think I could see how this would turn into something even more than it is, which gave me the luxury of sort of planning it out. I knew I was aiming at a Murphy's Lawless. I knew where I wanted to bring the series to facilitate Murphy's Lawless. And I knew that I looked, for instance, at Bain, and I said, I've got more stories to tell than they can publish. So I need to think about how I'm going to do that, expand the footprint, grow the brand, but not, but without pressuring Bain into that. So all of those things were operating in my mind 2 years at least before I wound up speaking to Chris Kennedy about it. So the thing that's different is that I guess I do worst case scenario planning, God knows, but I also did best case scenario planning, which is probably an exercise in some cross between naive stupidity and bold-faced arrogance, but I did it. And it's worked out so far. So now that I've said it, probably the roof is going to come down. So
Right, well, you know,
I think that Chuck's point about additional voices strengthening the feel of the universe is very valid. That's something that happened in the More Than Honor anthologies, where I integrated the stories into the storyline. I think the caveat to that is there can only be one set of hands on the wheel as far as the tech and the ultimate direction of the series, of the universe is concerned. In the Honorverse anthologies, I basically said, okay, give me a story idea. And if they gave me a story idea and they needed tech background or whatever for it, I presented it. With a couple of exceptions in the first anthology, which is where I learned that had to be done. That's exactly how we progressed. And aside from making sure that it fits with the tech and it doesn't violate canon of established events, I change very, 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 very few things in any of the stories that are submitted for the anthologies. And that's where you get the additional voice woven into the, for want of a better term, the harmony of the literary universe you're creating. But it's on the proprietor, if you will, the landlord, to make sure that the tenants behave themselves in terms of staying within the parameters or growing the parameters because somebody suggested change, but integrating that in at that time with its ramifications going forward, not just saying, well, that sounds like a great idea, and then finding out 3 novels later that you have to break the transporter to give them a problem to solve, you know.
Yeah, mine hasn't been so much technological, and I've had, I mean, Murphy's Lawless was another one of those things where I knew, you know, I learn and steal shamelessly from the best. Most authors do. I just sort of am the exemplar, perhaps, of it. But Eric, you know, Eric Flint, God love him, is one of the nicest people and most generous people on this planet, because Eric's anybody who came, you know, to either the Snarking the Plot or the Baines Bar and the plots, the sort of the slush pile there, or Eric himself, he is just so open to having anybody come in, and that can be a tricky thing, because you get writers of very, very different levels. And I think I would have, I have no idea what my life would be like right now if I had tried to do that, because I wouldn't have had the time for it. But
Eric is about the only editor writer that I know who has actually made that work.
Yeah.
With the disparity in levels of writing experience and skill and, frankly, ability. I can't think of anybody else who has, except you might be getting into that a little bit with Chris's many and manifold endeavors, because he has so many different writers in I refuse to call it the stable, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And they have different levels of capability and voice that would be difficult to manage. But once you get outside, like the Four Horsemen, that you get outside his core series, that's not as big a problem. But if you are doing something like 1632, where they all have to mesh, that can be really, really tricky.
And also, I think there's a wide variety of on-ramps, perfectly valid on-ramps, expectations and tastes in amongst the audience that actually prefers a $3.99 indie ebook to a TradPub book, and the reality of the economic and market realities of a traditional publisher, who, you know, they're investing in you long before they see a profit out of you.
Yeah.
Even if your first book pays out, I was very fortunate that way. But the bottom line is, they write a contract, and it's the better part of 2 years before they're seeing any money back on it. So I think there's a when I would put I would amplify or extend what David said, simply by saying, in the TradPub, traditional publishing realm, I can think of no one like Eric. I can think of folks outside that a bit, but I can't think of anybody else I'd say the one that comes close is when Jerry Purnell turned over War World to John Carr, but still it was mostly old hands who were sort of lassoed into play. But a lot of people got their start there, so it was a mixed bag, but it was nothing like what Eric has done. Why I invoked him was because I looked at that and I said, not for me. I need to know I'm going to work with people that there are certain issues that are already taken care of. They're pre-professionalized, or they are professionals. That's a minimum, or it will kill my own career.
Yeah. Well, I think also there's a difference between traditional publishing and e-publishing. I think of e-publishing in some respects the way that like the pulps. Okay, you're looking at a lot of product, and a lot of it is very, very good, but you live by turning over and creating fresh output. Whereas in traditional publishing, if you're turning out 2-3 books, 2 books a year, and maybe an anthology, and they're doing well, as a writer, you're good. If you're doing ebooks, you need more titles than that. And I think that plays its role in the expectations of the mediums. I tell people that the really great thing about indie publishing is that you get to read stuff you never would have seen before. And the really bad thing about indie publishing is you get to read stuff you never would have seen before.
Exactly.
It's the way it works.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. So Chuck, I know many authors have an advanced reader group. I'd say do you, but I kind of know. What value do you get from your ARG? What have they contributed to, or how have they improved your process or product?
Actually, I'll tell you, I don't that much have an advanced reader group. I definitely have proofreaders who are entering at a stage where they're catching. It's not what I would call the structural members of the novel or anything like that. It's happening at the level of initial proofreading. It first draft comes rolling off me. I am writing close enough to deadline that I don't have the luxury of big changes.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's the knowing laugh if I ever heard one. But I can say this much. I think it would be a wonderful. I think it would be a wonderful luxury. I would enjoy it. I would. But it's so far outside of anything that I can foresee, because right now, even though we talk about TradPub as being different than ebooks have still made a huge dent. The indie market has changed, I would say, our ecology.
Oh,
what I
absolutely.
mean by that is the pace at which they come out, as David was talking about, let me tell you, that is definitely changing audience expectations.
Yeah.
And
well, it's go ahead, Chuck. I'm sorry. No, you would go.
No.
Oh,
Killing
no.
me.
I was just going to say that.
I made you talk.
Yeah, I know. I tried having circulating to readers before I handed in the rough draft. It really the aggravation that came in from trying to marshaling that many responses was not worth the minimal gain that I was getting from it. I do have a first readers list. Some of the people that we are speaking to right now are on it. And those are the people who get the manuscripts at the same moment that I hand them in. And several of them have caught continuity errors or something like that and brought them to my attention. But you were talking about how the ecology of publishing has shifted. Okay, when War of Honor came out and made it to, I think, number 4 on the Times list, we shipped like 84,000 copies in hardcover. Okay, so Uncompromising Honor comes out, and Bain only printed 20,000 copies. They had to go back to press for like another 8 or 10, somewhere in there. But the difference was the ebook sales, and that's for a traditional publishing house. We're not talking here about the indies who are like 100% ebooks and whatnot. I think that it's very probable that ebooks are going to ultimately do to paperbacks what paperbacks did to hardcovers. And that the mass sales are going to become electronic, and the guys who want one to put on the shelf are still going to buy like the hardcovers. And the paperback is going to become an endangered species, not tomorrow or the next day, but paperback sales compared to what they were when I broke in years ago are a much smaller percentage of even a traditionally published author's sales.
I don't even know how we got on this topic. Oh, advanced reading group. So
yeah.
I don't really have one. I think it'd be fun, but the thing is that I also am mindful of I don't know who I'd really ask, and what I mean by that is I'm gonna say something that's perhaps provocative, or maybe everybody's gonna go people so much want to see what they want to see that I think it's almost like, you go to other filmmakers to look at your cut because they're looking at the product with such clinical detachment, and it's sort of like the level of investment is that they're your friend and they want to see it. They want to see a good film, but they don't have any sort of like, I want to see you do this or I want to see you do that, such as a viewer might feel, particularly if it's an ongoing saga. And generally the folks, therefore, who I think would be most likely to be detached, like I would never do that. Imagine if I called up somebody like David or Eric or Larry Niven and said, hey guys, do you have a month or so to just cut out of your schedule so you can look at this first draft of mine? Then after I had in processed at the mental institution, we could actually get down to some serious stuff. Because that ain't happening in this planet. And I write science fiction and I write fantasy, but I don't write the surreal. That I don't do. And that's sort of what would be involved. So it's a thing I would love, but I don't see a way to it almost.
The Inklings worked a lot better in the slower pace of the first half of the century than they would have today, even though distributing the manuscripts would be incredibly much easier. You just, press the send button and it's gone. I sold Honor Harrington was born the same year as the internet. And so I straddle that line between the absolutely no electronic publishing, no electronic distribution. You send hard copy or computer discs to your publisher, and where we are today. And the difference is just, I don't think my mind boggles all that easily, but it boggles when I look at that one. It's incredible.
Wow. Aside from your writing, you're also a frequent subject matter expert with NPR, Discovery, and various other media intelligence and defense agencies. That's rather cool. How did you get into that?
Well, pretty much like everything else. Actually, what happened was I wrote a book called Rumors of War and Infernal Machines. It's a nonfiction book. It was, I guess I was always the guy with a plan. When I went through and got my doctorate, I took a look at the dissertations that were coming out and I said, so I'm going to write a dissertation that has all the theory part up front. And when I'm done with it, I can go in with a scalpel that looks suspiciously like a chainsaw, cut it the hell out, and have actually something that would be a decent standalone book on its own that has some academic and research merit, but has been liberated from all of that $90 jargon that's in there. That was about essentially how science fiction writers have shaped policy and how policy or what's going on sometimes inside the five-sided squirrel cage leaks out into the science fictional realm and influences what we write. So I wound up, I've known Bud Sparhawk, who, if you know short fiction and analog, he's one of the premier artistes in that area. And he was a member of Sigma, which in those days was much smaller. It was maybe about 12.5 people. And it grew up out of the same Citizens Advisory Commission that Jerry Purnell, David Brin, a variety of others, they were the ones who sent that document, Mutual Assured Survival, up the hill to Reagan, and was sort of one of the backers of Star Wars, and then the if you will evolution into smart rocks and all that, brilliant pebbles, et cetera, et cetera. So it kept on going, and it found traction in a variety of areas inside the defense and the intelligence areas. And so I had latched onto that and cited people like Steve Sterling and Ann Purnell, and Footfall is for folks who don't know. You want to take a look at the meetings that the scientists in Footfall are having with the Pentagon experts. That's what Sigma in many ways not only does, but is based on. And there's a guy in there by the name of Robert Anson. Guess who that is? You know, no small amount of hero worship on Jerry and Larry's part there. And so this was all in my doctoral dissertation, which ultimately became this book. And so when I was coming back into trying to my second approach to this career, I said to Bud, you know, do you know anybody I could talk to? I know you know these people. And he said, yeah, let me see if I can get you a chat. So I wait a week, and I wait a second week, and I don't hear anything. And I write an email to Bud, and I say, Bud, is there anything forthcoming on this? And he said, just be patient. So not a thing I've ever been particularly good at, but you know, we live in a pharmacological wonderland. So at any rate, I wouldn't know, but at any rate, I was able to relax long enough to get an email from Arlen Andrews, who is the, oh my gosh, den mother, chief cat herder, organizer, and front man for, if you will, the crazy band that is Sigma Science Fiction in the National Interest. And I said, oh, great. I was, you know, I'd love to be able to talk to you. He said, I'd love to be able to talk to you too, because we want you. I was like, excuse me? And it all happened after that. So there you go. That's how it happened. I was writing about it, and suddenly I became it. And that's a very strange sensation.
I think that's cool.
Before we get to everybody's questions, I have a couple of housekeeping items. For those of you that have been kind of sort of paying attention to our schedule, we have now added 2 more authors in January. We will have on the 23rd, we'll have David Pedersen, who wrote the Angst series, and some other stuff. And we will have on the 30th of January, Jane Linskold, who has written in the Honorverse and who also wrote the Firekeeper series and several other things. So we're excited to have them forthcoming.
And runs a hell of an RPG, let me tell you.
Yes. So keep your eye on the Discord channel and the main TRMN page and the forums, because it'll get posted. We post every week. So and I did notice that the schedule prior to this was in the Manticore's Tale that just came out. So the rest of the schedule's in there. And if you ever have questions, you can always just ping ViewPlan. So Dave Pedersen is really excited about coming because he's got a new book coming out next month. So he was really thrilled. Second thing is, Chuck, I understand you have an announcement for us this evening.
Well, I thought I was going to have to do this alone, but as it turns out, I guess I won't. You know, one of the things, as for a long time, I've always said to David, it would be great to work together again. So I think at HonorCon, we decided we really wanted to do that. One of the things we did is, people who've read the books here will know, David has been Tuckerized as the Patch in Mark of Cain, who actually becomes an extremely important individual as the series goes on. Was clearly important enough already in number 5. I don't know if I have shown up yet, but I will in one case be dealt with in a manner very, very unusual. I understand I get to survive and be somebody with my name is Laudable, but somebody else is, I think, blows up Ganymede or something like that.
Yeah, right.
You know, those little rocks that are just, they're nuisances anyhow.
Yeah. You know.
But there's been conversation since then about and I always, there was a project I had in mind that I just knew, and I knew it would take I felt it would take too much time, and we probably didn't know each other that well yet, but there was a project I had in mind that I just knew I knew David Weber would be the person to write that part of this collaborative novel. And that novel is called Misbegotten. And that the ink is just on that this week, and it is set in the Kane Reorder universe. And so that's happening, and I could not be more delighted. And I you know, it's such an unusual story, though, that here's the thing that, you know, David, I didn't get a chance to tag with David and say, what can we even say about this?
Oh, I'm not going to say anything at all about it at this point. Well, the
Me
problem is that if you start talking about it, then you'll spend the next, I don't know, 20 minutes talking about it, and you realize that in order to explain part of it, you had to explain all of it. I will say that my appearance tonight was supposed to be a surprise for Chuck, but I forgot to tell the Dark Lady that. And so she spilled the beans on Facebook. Otherwise, I would have been quietly lurking in the background here until we got to that point. Yeah, jump out of the wedding cake, or whatever. God, that's a scary thought now that I think about it.
Oh man.
I should not have gone there. No.
Well, that's really
Thank
exciting,
God,
Chuck. When
at this
can we
moment, thank God for the pandemic. Oh,
Yeah,
that's fine.
I know you're all trying to unsee that in your minds about
So that's really
goes for
exciting,
anybody.
Chuck. When can we expect to
About
see
too
that?
Oh, is it like are we 2 years out?
We're about
Oh,
2 years from turning it in, I think.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
It's actually there are two books. The other one people may or may not be aware of. Eric is also writing in the Kane Reorder universe a story called Triage. Neither one of these books have Kane in them, but they have very major characters in them. One of them has one of Kane's children in them. And without, I can't say more. One of the reasons we can't talk about this is, in addition to it taking probably 20 minutes, is that one of the mere conceits of it is such a blow out of the water spoiler for not just that book, but for the whole damn series, because it has huge implications. I will tell you this much. There was one of the reasons I knew he was the guy for this job was because I love naval stuff. I love it, whether it's in the 1637s or in the future. And I knew there was this character, and that a naval book would go around well, and I would be able to open up that entire part of the universe. And so here I got Il Maestro, right? So there we are. So you can look forward to that, and it's going to, I think, be it will have all the familiar bells rung, but in very different keys, because the technology, when you get right down to it, of the Kane Reorder universe is in many ways very limited. It does some things really well, but in a lot of ways, it's very, very grounded to the stuff, that we have to deal with now. Yeah. And so it's going to be. I've been looking forward to this for just years.
Well, one of the problems is Chuck and I have wanted to do this for a long time, but with my schedule and the concussion at Dragon Con and a bunch of other stuff, and he was basically in the position of Tony saying, "No, you can't break the David by getting me, involved in this." And of course, he is now, a chip helplessly afloat on the mill race of my scheduling issues. We'll make it work.
And this just the having the excuse to work with David again, and really in a sort of very focused fashion, because that the novella I did for Worlds of Honor 6, David basically, here I was like, oh my God, how many changes are going to come back? And he said, it needs a paragraph at the end. It's like, really?
Yeah, this was awful, Chuck. You need a paragraph at the end, damn it.
But actually, the most I worked with David was when he was turning over Commander Cantrell in the West Indies was really supposed to be a Simpson book. And, David had these he just made such a big deal of his schedule, that it was so difficult and so filled with things. So we worked together quite a lot on him handing me the notes and brainstorming what that tech would look like. And I am absolutely indebted to him. And I think that's where we discovered that, we would have these debates, but they were about really tiny things. The huge canvas was, it's like we'd pretty much both paint it the same damn way, but that bolt would be shaped this way, So that's when if you're not too anal, that you are fortunate enough to have found a kindred spirit, a kindred mind, and I am so thrilled So
Well,
thrilled to be working.
people who can do collaborative novels, shared worlds and whatnot, they've got to have compatible personalities. There
yeah.
are there have been instances in which fantastic collaborators had a falling out and they could only communicate through their editor for a period or even for the rest of the duration of the series. But to make it work in the first place, you have to have that compatibility that will bring it together. And Eric was the one who made what I thought was a fascinating point. He said, it used to be that in order to collaborate, you had to live in the same house or the same neighborhood or at least the same town, because you had to be able to come over and sit down and talk, look at manuscript, pass it back and forth. Steve and I did the first Starfire novel with him in Virginia and me in South Carolina, with everything going back and forth by mail. And it took like twice as long for his mail to get to me, which proved to me what I'd always suspected, which was that Charlottesville sucked. But the problem with working by mail was just incredible. Okay. Now with the internet, you can have a conversation like this over the book. With the review function, you can send whole manuscripts back and forth like that. The collaborative process is something else that the electronic age has changed out of all recognition. And that's one reason I think why you are seeing more and more shared universes, more and more collaborations, and more of them that work.
Yeah, just jumping in on that for a brief. First of all, before we leave this topic entirely, the title of the book, if I did not underscore it, is Misbegotten. That has 3 meanings. Originally, it was going to be bastards, but Tony said that won't sell in Alabama. So I said, okay. So I don't know if that's true or not, but she held that was true. So Misbegotten it is. And what David was saying about series, we're talking about we're already half of the next, and I'm going to say season of Murphy's Lawless is already in first draft. And my job with it, I really, having worked in television, I will tell you, it is a little bit more like being the executive producer / showrunner than anything else. I mean, yes, I did it really is a novel when you start taking a look at, if you were to read the 6 novellas as they originally came out, this one is not, it is a collection in the sense of being braided and some people have said this is a braided novel, because my fans tended not to come to it early. Most of my fans are trad pub fans. That was part of the other strategy here, which was almost all of Chris's were indie fans. Mine were trad pub fans. We said, well, this could be like a Reese's cup, so let's get those 2 great tastes together and see what happens. And so far that has apparently worked out, but it's really like being a showrunner. And I think that things like Netflix and streaming and all the rest, we live in the age of the serial again. And for a period of time we didn't, but I think people, it seems like one of the first questions you get asked, David will certainly, I think, will give a knowing nod at this one. If you were in publishing in the 80s, and I actually was close enough to it that I knew and heard this sort of stuff, and you submitted a book, somebody would say, now this isn't a Trojan horse trilogy, is it? Because that was like, no, I want a lone book. I want a book that's 100,000 words long. That's what I want. Now, the first question you get is, what would you follow it with?
Yeah.
Totally different.
Yeah.
Totally different.
Well, and also part of it is that when I was breaking in, it was still on the heels of the let's not get in too deep with this writer until we know whether or not what he or she writes has legs. So let's not write something that will commit to, and also a lot of people are not aware of the 10% rule that was in effect at that time. Jim Bain was instrumental in overturning it. The big stores and the big chains ordered 10% of the sell-through on the preceding novel for a given author. So if you're starting out and you're establishing a trilogy and you have to get it all the way to the trilogy to follow your story, you were losing 10% off the top of your potential sales at every step of the process. And that made investing in a multi-volume story arc a lot chancier for an unknown author. And that's another reason why they wanted to be sure in the 80s, 70s, and the 80s that it was a complete manuscript, a complete book. It could have sequels, but it was not an unfinished storyline.
Yeah. And I can tell you so many, you may out there, because a lot of folks there, looks like you've probably seen a lot of trilogies or series start and you wonder where they go. And there's something called the death spiral of the third book. Because when you start, as David says, when you're saying, well, let's, we good sell through is 70%, right? And so an accountant who doesn't understand how this all works says, oh, so really we got 70% of what we printed sold, and we think that's a good number. So let's not publish that extra 30%. Let's just publish that 70%. So what happens? 70% of the 70% sells. So by the time you're in the third book, you're at under 50%.
Mm-hmm.
And you're dead. And everybody's wondering what the hell happened. And the answer is the bean counter that no one looked at.
Yeah. And that's one thing that Bain in particular has always been great about. Chuck and I are both very fortunate to have fallen into Bain's clutches, to be completely honest.
Yeah, when I started, I thought there were only two places that I was likely going to get published or would want to be published, and it's because they evinced that. Bain overwhelmingly, and also just given its core interests in science fiction, hard science fiction, exploration, military isn't a bad thing. All of those things. It was like, well, that's pretty much my ID card. And the other one is DAW. DAW, at least until recently, has always kept series alive. You take a look at, for instance, I love CJ Sherry. I think Foreigner series is wonderful. A lot of places would have probably pulled the plug on that someplace along the way, but they don't, because they are playing singles and doubles baseball, and they understand you win that way.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
That's awesome. So congratulations. We look forward to that.
Absolutely.
We look forward to a link as soon as we can get one.
Right. So before we move on to everybody's questions, we would be remiss as members of TRMN if we did not do our traditional toast. So I know that Amy Tyson, is that right, is the lowest ranking officer here. Are you comfortable doing a toast, Amy? If not, I have somebody else that can do it. Hang on, I'll unmute everybody. There we go.
I'm on my third glass of wine, so I will pass right now.
Okay. Hey, my wonderful chief of staff, it falls to you. So does everybody have something?
Quick, Sonia, go get something to drink.
30 seconds.
Okay, 30 seconds. I'm gonna go get something better.
I can't move that
I
I'm gonna go get something.
love my bosun.
who's running this damn pub anyhow?
I'm gonna get a shot glass.
Oh, you're not gonna drink out of the bottle tonight, Diane?
Well, we have esteemed guests here this evening.
Has to be classy.
I gotta be nice. I'm like,
Has to be classy today.
Got a glass. Why didn't they show up? Why didn't they talk?
I gotta remove the crucifix from the shot glass,
Oh.
Where my dad said it should always be.
There's a demon.
Well, they did call
I
it
had something stronger after that. Yeah.
He was Pope Tom the First, so it's all good.
Trying to
All right.
have a decent
Thank
glass.
you, Chris Thompson. It's all gone.
Lieutenant, the floor is yours.
Is everybody's back?
I think so.
Everybody?
Yep.
Okay.
Whoever's not here, raise your hand.
That's right.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Queen.
The Queen.
Queen.
I just got something better.
Grayson words?
Wait.
She said just a minute.
Yeah, Kathy's here. Amoral compass.
Unlike the moral compass, who's AWS.
I just got something better.
Oh, you got
There we go.
Roll pod.
Roll pods!
Fire. Whoa.
Honey,
A little strong there, Diane.
Yeah, just a little bit. All right.
I can't believe you got them together so fast.
Oh, let's open it up to some questions.
There's Grayson's here.
We have
we have
questions.
Graysons. We have
in the-
Graysons.
Okay.
So sad.
Kathy.
Well, Ben Loyola's here too, you know.
Oh, Ben.
Yeah, Ben-
Ben.
And
Ben-
Ben's the lowest ranking.
always-
Grayson
Oh,
officer.
Ben.
I am
Well,
always.
Ben.
That's okay, Ben. If you
I'm
don't know the
always
toast, I got it.
I
Ben
always know the
Loyola,
toast.
aka Harry
Oh,
Sanders.
the
Stop it and
comforter.
let's do this, Ben.
No, no, for Grayson, the key
Ugh.
is the tester. That's it.
What she said.
Don't Ben. Oh my
Oh,
God.
and
What'd
For
she-
Grayson, the keys, the sword, and the tester. There you go.
Grayson, the keys.
Grayson
and
words.
words.
And the
Tester.
keys,
The
the
sword
sword,
and
and
the
the tester.
tester.
Do we have
I'm
any
always
other
the one to do
branches?
it.
No, it
You
wasn't.
didn't do it
Missy
this
did it
time,
last
though.
time.
Any other branches? Okay.
All right.
He squeaks.
All right. So we're
I'm
gonna.
going to ask everybody to mute yourself now, and you can
Oh my-
unmute when you're called if you have a question.
All right.
Thank
Hang
you.
on, I gotta get my thingy.
Here we go. Captain Smith and Sergeant Robert Smith, please unmute and ask your fantastic question. Oh yeah, I'm not asking them for you guys. You have to do it.
No, you got to ask. Are they still here?
Yeah, they're right here. I see them.
All right. Good. Making sure. Everybody.
Here we go. Now I'm unmuted.
Okay.
The first question I have, which is for Chuck, which is, assuming it doesn't get canceled, and I'm sending up prayers daily to the tester that it does not, will you be in attendance at Fantasy?
That's the plan.
And this is David also, maybe, question mark?
Okay.
And
David, you're asking. I see.
well, both of you actually now.
David, you're muted, hun. There we go.
And I also have another question for both David and Chuck.
David, we still can't hear you, which is weird.
Try now.
There. we
Okay,
go.
now we can hear. Yes.
Yes. In the process of all of that toasting, I hit the mute button.
I want some of what he had.
Right?
Yeah, that caffeine do it every time. What was the event that we were asked about?
Fantasy.
Fantasy. Oh yes, definitely. Assuming they let us do it. As a matter of fact, Joel's coming through town Monday, and we're having dinner with him on his way home.
Excellent. And then I have another question, which is also both for you and Chuck, which is, as someone who's both done gaming and collaborative writing, would you say that a good collaboration is similar to how a good gaming group operates? You know, the DM, aka the primary author, sets the scene, and then the players or the co-writers who add to the story?
I would notice the avidity and eagerness with which we respond.
I think part of the problem is that every collaboration is different.
Yeah.
And you're going to approach them differently for example, in the Honorverse, I'm the senior partner. In 1632, Eric was the senior partner. In Chuck's universe, Chuck will be the senior partner. And so the roles shift. And it also depends on how much input your collaborators want and can have. I usually try to brainstorm with them. Anybody who's ever worked with me is familiar with the infamous ooh shiny moment. When I'm talking to somebody and they say like, ooh shiny, and they're like, oh God, everything just took a left turn. But that's part of the collaborative process that you don't get when you're writing solo, because those ooh shiny moments don't come along. Okay. So I would say in some instances, it is exactly like working with a gaming group. In others, it is nothing at all like working with a gaming group. And it just depends on the particular relationship.
Yeah, my first thought when I heard the question asked, I didn't go to the collaborative group. I went to the gaming group. And I thought, and I know a bunch of gaming groups that I don't think they could put together a shopping list. You know, but and they failed at that. But in general, there are some parallels. I tend not to see it that way. But if you want to talk about gaming as a from the design side, now you're talking about something where there can be a lot in common. As a matter of fact, you know, one of the things people always say, oh, don't you want your series to get picked up as a cinematic property? And I'm like, yeah, I would really like a game. And one of the reasons that I like a game, even though there's generally, although not so much the case anymore, there's generally been less money there, is that game designers think more like writers than directors and producers do. And having worked in all those areas. And the bottom line is this: see these little squares we're all looking through at each other? That is all a director gives a damn about.
Yeah.
The larger world, if it's not going to show up there, costs money, takes screen time, and it's really got to validate itself in a big way. Once you start building out a franchise like Marvel or Star Wars or something like that, that can begin to shift somewhat, but still, it's what's happening right now. Game designers think about, they could go anywhere. And that's kind of related, I think, to the way a writer thinks about it's a whole world. And I can't, it's going to feel like people in a stovepipe if I write about people in an event stovepipe.
The only way that a cinematic series could do justice to like one of Chuck's novels would be to basically take each novel as a season.
Like The Expanse.
Like, yeah, exactly. And there you've got it's the same with the Honorverse.
Okay? Yeah, I was about to say that. Yep.
Yeah. There's so much detail that is integral to building out the universe and explaining the characters' choices, that if you want the viewer to understand what the reader understands. And there's another problem in which I think gaming is more like novelization than movies are, in that in gaming it is easier to put the gamer behind the character's eyes to see what's going on in here. That's very difficult to do cinematically.
Yeah.
And all kinds of nuances can be lost or totally reinterpreted by an actor and a director. My favorite example of that is what Jack Nicholls did to The Shining. Okay, compared to the original story and what you get in the cinematic performance, it's just night and day. Okay, and it pretends to be the same story, which Starship Troopers really didn't. But it pretends to be the same story, and it's not. Okay, and that's, I think, every author's nightmare, is that if I let somebody do this, then they're going to do it wrong. But the upside of that is, if they're producing it, they're paying the freight. They're the ones taking the risk. You're not, really, because you don't have any cash up front in it. You're only looking at potential profit on the backside. And so not only legally, but I think ethically and morally, you can take your best shot at convincing them they're doing it wrong. But it's their decision, unfortunately.
So we got another couple of questions here from Lieutenant Terry Lassaline. You want to unmute and go ahead and ask your question?
For Chuck, you were talking earlier about having 3 kids in the house and trying to write. What do your kids think of your have they even read anything? What are their opinions? Do you are they like, oh God, it's only Dad? Or is there something that, hey Dad, that's not bad?
That's a good question.
So my 4th son, who is a paratrooper and has his Ranger tab and is with the 173rd Airborne Combat Brigade in Italy, and is one of my target readers. He gets all the nuances. He sees all the little bits that one of the things, if you get into my novels, and there are Easter eggs in there that still have not been found. And one of the things that happens is that something that looks like I have I'm wedded to this, which is the idea. Books very often have this tendency to let characters know that something is important almost right away. But so much of life is realizing that that thing that you thought was not important at all turns out to be crucial, important. It shapes the whole world, and it changes your context of everything that you've thought. And he gets all that, so he's pretty much he's deeply on board. As a matter of fact, he was also Tuckerized. In as a matter of fact, his name is and David will find this, and anybody who's read the 5th book, his name is Kyle. So he was, and he's one hell of a smart kid. At any rate, which also I tried to put in there. My kids are actually really, they want to read the books. 2 of them are 13, actually no, just recently 14. They're good readers. I would say that I have one person who's an inveterate fan who says, one of the things I like about your books is I learn at least one new word with every book. When a dedicated reader in his 60s says that, I'm thinking maybe a little older than 14. But it's good. It's good. It might be good practice. But they want to, and my two older ones, 24 and 20 respectively, 21, are really, they like it, they understand it. We are not a fan family. I didn't come from a fan family, but alterity, science fiction, and fantasy, it runs a very, very deep, wide river of involvement and interest in the family. So they think it's pretty cool that I'm involved in this, and I'm so glad they do, because it makes the sacrifices for them, I think, more understandable, because this is a job that you spend a lot of time on your own. There's no way around it, and they understand it, and they think it's cool and worth its while. So again, I got really lucky.
Well, I think my guys, the girls have read some of my stuff. Michael, not so much. Michael's not a big reader. And by the way, he just signed the enlistment contract for the Marines straight out of high school. And his mom said, why, we're good with that, or his uncle Mike was a Marine for 27 years. I mean, she said, but why right out of high school? And he says, Mom, if I went to college for the first year, I'd party and get thrown out. I might as well go to the Marines and let them kick that out of me. And I'm like, okay, I think it was maybe a little bit different for my kids, because I was 49 when the girls were born and 50 when Michael was born. And I'd already been published for like 15 years, I think, at that point, 12, 15. So when they were still itty bitties, they were understanding that this is what Dad did for a living. But I was careful to not cram my stuff at them. I wanted them, when they came to it, to come to it on their own. And if they didn't, that was fine. But they have understood from the time that they were like old enough to walk, that Mom and Dad were going to be going to conventions, and they've gone to conventions with us. So they understand fandom. I think it took them a little aback the first time they walked into a room at a con and saw it full of RMN uniforms. And they're like, Daddy, are you famous? And I'm like, for certain values of the word,
in this room, damn straight. Yeah.
Well, I think that what the cons have done is have brought home to them that there's something besides just the titles on the bookshelf behind what I do. It's made the readers real to them, I think. But yeah, I would say probably I have not been read by my kids as much as Chuck has been read by his. Now, the rest of my family, including those with whom I have profound political disagreements, read my books and are very supportive of them, and I think genuinely appreciate them for what they are. But the kids, not so much. I'm sure they'll discover the books about 2 years after I'm gone. I'll feel much better then.
One of the really interesting things that I found, David, and I don't know if it's the case with Chuck, because I just don't know your fans, but David, your fandom draws people to read your books. I had never read any of your books, sorry, until I joined TRMN. And I just joined because I liked the people and the things that they did. And then I started reading the books and went, oh, I get it.
Well,
You
the
know,
T-
but it's kind of cool.
Yeah, well, the TRMN is really a fairly extraordinary group, and I wish I could take credit for them. There's a incredible diversity of political opinion, social opinion, lifestyles wrapped up in the TRMN, and for the most part, we are civil to one another when we discuss it. But or we just don't discuss it. That's being civil too, you know. But what I tell people is it's the same as with my writing. Somebody said to me, "Thank you for showing me so many things," and I said, "I can't show you anything that you don't already have. I can only evoke what is already in there to be evoked. I can expose you to information you didn't have. I can, you know, create settings you didn't have. But whatever of value you find in what I've written is there because that value already exists in you, or I couldn't speak to it." Right. And I think that sort of sums up what the TRMN is. As well. And like you say, it is family. It is very inclusive and very welcoming. And I'm flattered. You know?
Well, you put it right out there, didn't you? In the title, in the name of the character, honor.
I did, and that was the one character name that I absolutely knew going in. Not the last name, but the first name that I knew going in. And I deliberately chose Harrington because I knew that if the series worked, okay, then Horatio Hornblower was who they were going to be compared to. Patrick O'Brien wasn't that well established at that point, so I knew it was going to be Harrington. It was going to be Hornblower. And I had always loved C.S. Forster's novels. Anyway, I did learn one lesson from Forster, which is I started with the chronologically first novel of the series, and I'm never going to go back and do an honor novel before Basilisk Station, because the character grows and develops, and it's hard to go back and sustain a novel-length manuscript about naive honor before Basilisk Station, and then not have somebody come to Basilisk Station later on and say, "What the hell happened to her?" You see what I'm saying?
Yep, absolutely. So
It sounded like Terry still had a part of a question that she had not yet that hadn't been answered or asked.
Yeah. Switching subjects for a second, you were talking about your gaming groups, Chuck, and I've game mastered a couple of groups. And have you ever had a problem where they solved it in such an unusual way that they just you just almost couldn't deal with it? You're like, what am I going to do now?
They broke the game.
Right?
Yeah, they broke the game.
There's a reason I never called myself a dungeon master or game master. I mean, sometimes I was shortened as DM, but I really do believe in the term referee. And the reason I say that is because I designed, when I was doing most of my gaming, and both designing it and then running it, a lot of that was essentially trial runs and things testing that I knew that were going to influence or be used with serial numbers filed off one day in novels. So part of my job really was one of the joys for me when I designed something was I don't want the opposition to either be somehow.
Why did Fluff always want me as a playtester?
Because that's kind of ridiculous. And I also, if they're smart, I'm going to design them. I'm going to design their circumstances, the things the precautions they've taken, the steps that they're going to take, with all the intelligence that I would give to the folks, that the players would have. As a matter of fact, one of the first thing David ever said about me, because I think this was the first thing he ever heard about me, Tom McCarroll, who's located right next to him right now, was down in, I want to say, Virginia, at a con there, a game, and was talking with David, I believe, and he described something that had happened, an ambush on a road, and David said, "Classic L ambush." that would be a good game. And it was pretty hairy. But so what I'm saying is, I don't have an outcome in mind. I don't have a sort of an end point. I don't want them to tell the story that I'm setting out. I really want to see what they do with it. And they can turn aside, they can come back to it, whatever the case may be. It's up to me to make it compelling. And if it's not, then they'll find something else, because that's what they do.
There's also a difference between something that's designed as a module and something that's designed as an open-ended gaming world.
Absolutely.
In a module, I think the DM needs to be a little more involved in guiding things and moving them along. In an open-ended universe, which is what Northressa is, I spent 15, 20 years building Northressa as a gaming universe. The adversaries were established, and what you're trying to accomplish overall is established. But after that, it was very much almost a free form, because I had built the world in enough detail that I could let them decide where they wanted to go and what they wanted to do, and just handle whatever they got into as we went along. And my favorite was the 19-year-old Valley Elf, but we'll get into that another time.
Yeah, I mean, I've given the rules, and they didn't break them. They did what I wanted, but they really had a creative way of getting out of it.
Yes.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Okay.
We have another question from Patrick. Patrick, if you want to unmute and ask your question, sir.
I think
there we go.
Not hearing
Got
Patrick. There we go.
I got it.
All right. So, Chuck.
Hi, Patrick.
Loving Lawless. Awesome stuff. Really, really digging it. So, having created all these views, especially with Lawless into the Kane verse and stuff, is there, for you as the creator of this, enough conceptual elbow room for you to continue exploring and evolving it?
Oh God, yes.
Okay.
We're just getting started. Pardon me. Go ahead.
So I've got a lot of friends who are authors and stuff. So one of the things that a couple of them ran into was that they scoped their universe in a certain way that they all of a sudden found themselves kind of down a conceptual blind alley. And went, oh crap, now what do I do? Right. So I'm curious, because I obviously David and the Honorverse is massive. Kaneverse is reading the same way to me. So I'm excited, especially as David partners with a bunch of other contributors and stuff to kind of chase down the rabbit holes and stuff, which Murphy is kind of that for you, right? You're just kind of taking it.
Oh, it's kind of that, but there are things that are getting revealed in Murphy which actually will double back and become absolutely essential to the main arc. There's things they're running into, and what you're going to learn about what that world is. There's none of these novels that ultimately ignores. Look, the bottom line is, now we have yet another place where there are humans all over the place, but how'd they get there? Well, that kind of tells you something probably about the origins, at least in terms of how did humans get on Rabac? Were there, and by the time you get to the end of the book, you're going to realize that the Indigs, and it's one of the things that, where are you in the book right now, Patrick?
Chapter 8.
Chapter 8. You will have not gotten there yet. I won't spoil it for you. There's evidence that things go back even further than they think. And that plays a very, very important role in and the things they learn about that are connected to that will play a very important role in the main series. But you're right. It feels like it's drilling down, and it is. It's a small system. It's a contained system, but it's also an important system. as far as feeling like I've sort of put blinders on myself or have put walls of development, I think probably that doesn't happen for me, because when you get right down to it, there's a lot of military engagement, and there's a lot of tech, and there's a lot of exploration and first contact, but that's really not the game I'm hunting. I'm hunting, I guess you would say, I'm hunting the numinous of what is out there. We don't know yet. I don't for a second think, I believe that a novel of prediction is inherently a fool's game, but a novel of possibilities. And that's one of the reasons why I like to try to keep an almost, at moments, techno thriller realist vibe to it, is because I want people to get that sense of, wow, that could be me. That's things feel real. It has textures. The human interactions have textures that I recognize, not because I think that it's going to, change the world, but the bottom line is we right now are thinking about something that, let's look at it this way. It's like we have two paths, right? There's the path that says we can't find a good reason to go back to space or live there, don't want to spend the money, in which case we will sit here and eventually kill ourselves or get killed by the timepiece burning inside our own sun. Or we are going to go to space. And when we go to space, we're going to have ourselves a whole bunch of questions to ask. And those questions are going to include, are we alone? If we're alone right now, was there something here before? Would we recognize it if we saw it? And what do we do about it? And in the process of going out there, and this is for me, one of the interesting valences of aliens, exosapiens, if you will. If you take a look at the exosapiens I've designed, there's almost none of them that isn't, and this is intentional, an extreme version of what I will call a certain set of human values or presuppositions or predispositions that are sort of being played at an extreme version. And I also try to keep them realistic, but they're also a way of experimenting with who could we become? How could our differences going out into space and living in environments which will change us for generations upon generations, these are all questions that interest me, and there's no end to those. So that's probably one of the reasons why I don't feel like I'm in a tight stall in a stable or something like that.
I would add to that one of the reasons that Chuck's Exosapiens work is that there has to be a point of contiguity with humans for humans to be able to understand their motivations, no matter how well the author explains the difference in their psychologies and their views of the universe and so forth. I would also say that what I have found is that short stories and collaborations and, if you will, side series in the same literary universe actually create more elbow room for the universe rather than less, because it gives you different handles and different insights. There is no way in the world that I could find the time to write everything that I'd like to write in the Honorverse on my own, all by myself. And in addition, you don't want books that are set 300, 400 years earlier than the main series to have exactly the same voice as the main series. They're a different time, they're a different era, that people have different mindsets, and therefore it helps to have a subtly different voice to the way that the books are written. So like I say, I think it creates more elbow room rather than less, at least in that respect.
Patrick, one quick question. Your friends, are they writing for an indie market for the most part?
No, these are, I'm an old guy. These are, traditional writers.
And I think that's good, because I think where I've seen what David was talking about earlier regarding that sort of relentless trip hammer pace of production, very often I think can get people the desire to get it out. Very often I think is the cost is on reflection and sometimes, pushing the boundaries, because that's time consuming, and it has a very, very incalculable return on investment. It's like, how many days will I need, or how many hours will I need when the next epiphany or breakthrough or cool idea is going to come along? if you're worried about what do I have to get in tomorrow, next week, et cetera, I think it gets in the ways. But I wish your friends all the luck, and I agree with David wholeheartedly. Don't worry too much.
Yeah.
Just explore. Go over the next hill. There'll be something there. It won't be what.
At least one of them has kind of backed out of the alley and
Uh-huh.
said, okay, obviously this was not the direction I intended to take.
Mm-hmm.
And is looking seriously at not a classically reboot, right? But looking at, okay, what does this mean to where I want to be? Which is, we consume a lot of bourbon when we have these discussions. But,
I like your choice of lubricant. I really
no,
like
no,
your
no.
choice of
Single
lubricant.
malt. Single malt.
I do
Single malt
single
is
malt
the.
too, David. I do
The
single malt.
northerner
too,
here
by
is
the way.
talking about bourbon, and you're talking about single malt. My
I am
God.
indeed the
Yeah,
elixir
yeah.
of inspiration. Okay, comes from the British Isles. I'm sorry.
Well, I like a good heavy peat just as much as the next Scotsman. So, but I've discovered Texas bourbon. So, and I'm kind of reveling in the spiritual nature of this thing. So,
I have to admit, my first trip to Europe, I discovered how Europeans look at vodka, and it changed my views enormously.
yeah. Oh yeah.
So we've got a couple more questions, and then we'll go on to our general social. All right, so Mark Darby, unmute and go for it.
No,
No, it's not unmuting. Here, let me ask the question then. He had a good one. Let me scroll back up to it. I apologize.
they have baby in the background probably.
Yeah, probably. Where'd it go? He had a good one. All right.
Oh, host has to, let me unmute him.
I did unmute him.
Let me try again.
There we go.
There we go.
Alrighty. Mine's actually for both of you, and hopefully it's easier. It's kind of a spin-off of an earlier question that Cheryl asked. You were asked what you liked, what you liked, or who is your favorite one to share worlds with. My question is what has been your biggest roadblock sharing worlds? Obviously, the internet makes this a lot easier, as you said, David. You've got the whole tubes. You can get manuscripts back and forth very secure, very quickly. You can now face-to-face any time of the day, as long as the Dark Lady allows you to. But what do you two find is your biggest roadblock to sharing worlds? Whether it's your world you're sharing with someone else or sharing somebody else's world.
I think
you go.
I think probably the two biggest roadblocks that I have encountered are scheduling differences and the differences of the speed at which the partners write. I am not one of those people who can multitask and have 4 projects going simultaneously that I'm actively involved in. I need them to sequence. I need to at least be able to sequence work sessions. And so that has been an issue for me. And after that, it is possible to have an irreconcilable difference about where you want to take a character or an event. And that can be a deal breaker. If one of you is convinced that this will be a disastrous decision and the other one is convinced, no, this will be perfect, the readers will love it. That's a problem. And I don't think you flip a coin in a case like that. I think you have to stick to your guns in a case like that. If you're convinced it's disaster on the one hand, or you're the guy who's convinced it's gold, I don't think that one is compromisable. And so in that instance, the series doesn't get written, or in some cases it just stops. But that's me, I don't think it's the way that Eric would approach it, for example. But that's one reason why I couldn't handle as big a shared universe, I think, as he is comfortably doing laps around the pool in.
So for me, I would say the first thing that came to mind, although it may not be structurally the most significant, is the no matter how good the internet is, somebody says, well, for instance, somebody was recently give you an example from Murphy's Lawless. Somebody was saying, so what are they dressing in? What are the indigs dress in? And is it just sort of Arab stuff? And is it this, that, and the other thing? And I realized, and this is I love getting these questions because the questions spin off ideas. And given the fact that the temperature changes there when things are moving towards perihelion, the nature of what they have to wear and the problems they contend with alter. And of course, what they've got therefore is they're going to have all those traditions, all those concerns when they're designing everything from clothes to, habitation to anything else. And what happens is it gets me on such a roll so fast that it's like typing isn't quick enough. and it's like, I just want to be able to throw everything aside and just run that down, because I know that those details, I think not only is the devil in the details, but so is the immersivity. It's one of the things that it's the little things that tell you that somebody has really sort of stood in their own virtual reality machine between their ears. They've stood in that place. They've listened to the sounds. They've smelled those smells. And now they're going to give you some of those details, just grace notes, not a sort of long dive down into a sort of like Proustian sensory orgy of them, but just enough to say, this is real. This is a place, and here are its specifics. And what's very difficult is that I'll get it will be, I mean, it's a wonderful problem in the sense that I have a collaborator who comes and says, what do you think about this? And I'm like, oh. As a matter of fact, the entire second season happened that way because I was on Messenger with Chris Kennedy, and he was saying, where do you think we're going to go? And I said, well, at the end, I think this is going to happen in book 1. And then I said, oh my God, what that means is, and oh my God, what that means is, and that shot like all my work day, because if my feeling is when that sort of stuff is flowing, you don't cap it, but that can make all your plans kind of difficult.
Mm-hmm.
I would say the other thing that can be, I had another thing, but I can't remember it, and we're running out of time. So I'm not gonna, I think that's enough.
So what we're gonna do now